Today on the show, we've seen desert owls swoop down and rip soldiers' necks with their talons. We've seen the scorpions, the wandering spiders, the wasps. But when the Leviathan from the sands begins recording its podcast, one must listen and listen closely. Welcome to Gom Jabbar, your guide to the iconic world of Dune. We'll be exploring the themes, philosophies, and characters found in the sandy depths of this vast universe, from Frank Herbert's groundbreaking novels to the adaptations on film and TV. My name is Leo.
And my name's Abu.
And today on the show, we are back with Dune Prophecy. Episode 4, The Wandering Spiders, and a bunch more people burning. Our backs, folks, are bleeding. Everything's going off the rails. But before we get too far into it, let's take care of our housekeeping. Let's make Shout Out Mapes proud.
That's right. Starting off with a spoiler warning for today's discussion, folks. Today's episode will contain spoilers for Dune Prophecy episodes 1 through 4. Make sure you've watched. And for Brian Herbert's prequel book, Sisterhood of Dune. We also recommend you've seen Denis Villeneuve's movies and read the book Dune by Frank Herbert.
And a huge shout out, as always, to our Quisatz Hatterack level patrons, Rob Silver, Daniel Dion, Jonathan Lambert, and C.R. Spruill. Folks, we'd like to elevate you to the High Council itself.
That's right.
What need you do? Nothing. You're so generous. You're so kind. You're so giving. You've earned your spots. And we're going to actually kill and out other great houses just to make room for you. And you know, Lance Red be damned. They can claim that we're biased. We are. You're the best.
We are.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Sorry, not sorry.
Sorry, not sorry at all.
Of course, our gratitude extends to all of our patrons. If we could burn the whole Landsrat to the ground and just install our patrons, we would.
Sometimes
That's
you
a
have to
big
burn
task.
a thing to the ground before you can rebuild it. Lesson
Exactly,
from the episode.
Exactly. We also want to remind everyone that if you don't have the ability to become a monthly supporter on Patreon right now, that's okay, because we have another way that you can show your appreciation and help make this show possible. Check out the show notes for a link to our Buy Me a Coffee page where you can buy us a spiced coffee. It's just a one-time tip. You decide how much that tip is. It's a great little way of saying thank you and letting us know you appreciate all the work we put into this show.
Indeed. Now, as always, here is the overview for today's episode. First up, we're going to quickly summarize the events of episode 4 of Dune Prophecy. Then we will share some things that we liked, things that we wish could have been a little bit better. And we'll finally wrap up with our Minutia, little lore tidbits that we spotted along the way. But before we get into it, we're going to take a quick break. So don't go anywhere. We haven't even started the episode yet. We'll be right back right after this.
Welcome back, folks. Let's start today with a quick summary of episode 4 to refresh your memory. This episode of Dune Prophecy opens on Wallach 9, which is abuzz after all of the acolytes experienced a terrifying and possibly prophetic dream and or vision.
Yeah.
In a horrifying scene, we see that Sister Emmeline, nearly kills herself, nearly stabs herself with a knife, similar to the way Dorothea died next to that pool. But at the very last second, Sister Jen rushes in and is able to stop her and save her life and seemingly wake her up from some sort of trance that she was stuck in.
Right. Yeah.
Now, later on in the episode, we'll see Tula speaking with Emmeline, speaking with Sister Jen, and trying to understand what the hell happened last night.
Yeah.
All of the acolytes were having the same what? They were seeing who? And it's shocking stuff. I think there's another layer here that what they're perhaps witnessing or describing is a little too similar to the secret that Tula and Valia and Sister Avila and all those conspirators are holding on to, which is
Right. Yeah.
the truth of how Sister Dorothea died all those years ago.
And also the truth of how Kasha died very recently,
Yeah.
where it started with a terrifying vision and a dream.
Yeah. Now, after this little meeting in the office, Sister Emmeline and Jen are sent away and told not to worry about this and not to incite panic. And then Sister Avila, in fact, turns to Tula and says, "Leave this alone. Don't fuck with this.
Yeah.
It'll go away. Don't tamper with it." Which is precisely what Tula is not going to do.
Good. Fucking good. Avila's out here with bad advice. Oh, a sister recently died. Prophetic vision dream killed by fear. All of the acolytes just had a terrifying dream. Leave it alone. It'll blow over. Fuck off, Avila.
Ridiculous. Yeah.
Ridiculous. Well, over on, I guess, still Seleucus Secundus. I think they're kind of in the Harkonnen house. I don't think they're on Lankavale. Are they?
No. This feels like the Harkonnen embassy or the
Embassy
Harkonnen house
or-
on
yeah.
Seleucia. Yeah.
That's what I got. Valia is with the Harkonnens, and she has a confrontational meeting with her uncle and nephew, proposing that it's time for House Harkonnen. It's time to correct the mistake. House Harkonnen now gets its very own truth-sayer.
Hello.
And, I mean, listen, if you're celebrating already, I've got some even better news for you.
Okay.
It's going to be the Mother Superior herself.
Hello.
Hello, all caps. Very exciting. Now, at one point, she might as well have said, "Sister Theodosia, can you please fucking eviscerate my nephew? Just tear this poor man to shreds." Because Theodosia does. She's like, turns out, Haro Harkonnen, what he wants more than anything is to be respected. And he fears being mocked. And because of that, Valia is able to say, well, how about this? What if I get you a seat on the High Council? Wouldn't that be fucking crazy? And Haro Harkonnen's like, yo, if you can do that, sure. I'm all ears. Now, throughout this scene, I just wanted to point out, I really appreciate the placement of Griffin's portrait. This portrait of Griffin Harkonnen is looming over Haro's shoulder. I'm sure he was told his whole life about this beloved uncle who died because of the machinations of his aunt, who's now abandoned the family. So I liked this kind of visual metaphor of Haro living with Griffin just kind of looming over his shoulder. That's who he has to live up to.
Yeah.
It's cool. Now, over at the Carinos, they are having an equally confrontational breakfast meal at one of the most beautiful waterfall terraces I've ever seen in my goddamn life. And Yanez shows up and straight up is like, yo, I don't feel safe in my own home. A child was murdered, and rumor is it was this fucking guy who did it. Desmond, at this little breakfast conversation, is like, yeah, I fucking did it. And it wasn't a murder. It was the correct punishment for having illicit technology, for having forbidden, thinking machine technology. Now, the final bit here is that House Carino is gearing up for hosting the great houses of the Landsraad, the High Council. Everyone's coming together to meet, to talk about things. All of this is about to happen, and we even get a little sense of that with the line that Havako says to Yanez, we need to present a unified front for the Landsraad. We need to appear strong right now and united as House Carino, as the Imperial House, because all these outside people are going to be here looking at us, judging us. And again, these are the people that Havako is afraid of because he's afraid of being seen as weak and not living up to his father, blah, blah, blah.
Right, which in fact we learn in the very following scene, because we then meet Desmond Hart as he is casually tearing apart and burning one of Kasha's old Sisterhood books that was laying around. In my opinion, his greatest crime to date. And the Emperor comes in and they chat. It's just two dudes, two bros having a bit of a heart-to-heart in this moment. Havako sits down. He admits his feelings of insecurity, feeling like he has huge shoes to fill. He'll never live up to his great ancestors. One ancestor was a war hero, another ancestor a great so-and-so, and he's just a nobody. Nobody respects him. Desmond tries to use this moment to basically convince the Emperor to be more assertive. You're the boss, my guy. Act like it. Rule with an iron fist. Assert that what you say goes, and when people don't listen, use me. I'll be your weapon.
Yeah.
Put me out there, coach, and we both get what we want.
Right.
For what it's worth, though, the Emperor is still cautious, and he says, no, not yet. Not right now. This is not the time to be hasty. Lance Ride meeting's happening. We're going to play this by the book. He's not ready to commit to any sort of ruthless actions as Emperor yet.
I got a little bit of a sense, too, that his hesitance is because this is so clearly something on Desmond's shoulders, right? Like Desmond is the one burning Sisterhood books. He's been anti-Sisterhood the whole time. He killed Kasha. It's like he's going, you should remove all truthsayers from the Lance Ride period. And Havako's still kind of trying to, I got the impression this was partially also him perceiving as, are you bringing this to me? Or is this something I really need to be worried about? Or is this like a you thing? And then I'm not ready to act on this because I don't see it as necessary yet, because it's not yet related to his needs, right? This is still something that is being motivated by Desmond's desires or Desmond's vendetta.
I mean, Desmond certainly hasn't been shy about his hatred of the Sisterhood. He's not exactly being subtle. I'm the only one that can tell you the truth. I would never use the truth against you.
Or like the first episode, right, where he was like, I thought those witches knew everything, right?
Yeah.
About Kasha.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, meanwhile, we cut out to a nondescript alley in the city in Zimia, where we see Kieran and his rebel friend who we met earlier, who we affectionately nicknamed Hulk Hogan. They meet up with an Ixian tech smuggler who gives them, in exchange for many Solaris, an autonomous hunter-seeker-ish looking little drone bomb thing, which of course is very advanced thinking machine technology and very, very illegal.
Yeah. Well, over with Valia, she is recording a vulnerable, really heartfelt voice memo to DM her sister, but ultimately deletes it right as she's saying, like, I could really use you here. It would really help her for you to be here. And
Same.
Really,
we've all been there with an ex.
Oh, my God. With an ex, she's texting her sister. You're like, toxic relationship vibes. I get it. That's so funny. Yeah, so she ends up deleting it, or she ejects the little memory card and breaks it. Now, Theodosia's there to give a report. Well, Michaela reports that they've got this little thermal bomb hunter-seeker, and Valia's like, all right, yeah, sounds good. Sounds very preventable. And her plan is to swoop in, be the savior, reveal the plot, and save everyone's lives. And through doing so, she will be back in the good graces of House Carino.
And throw Kieran Atreides to the wolves as well.
And throw Kieran Atreides to the wolves. Something I get the impression she is all too happy to do.
Oh, yeah.
Now, although the sisters didn't start these rumors, these kind of spreading rumors about Pruitt Richese dying, she decides that they are going to take advantage of it, and they use their truthsayers in this kind of fun montage of like whispering and manipulating to bring the other members of the High Council to particular houses. They are going to bring House Harkonnen onto the High Council at the cost of House Harkonnen has to open an official inquiry into the death of Pruitt Richese, naming Desmond and House Carino as potentially the perpetrator of the murder.
Yeah, this was a weak point of the episode for me, for sure. I found some of this sister scheming to be kind of unbelievable. Like the questions that come to mind for me here are why no one in the Landsraad is questioning why the Mother Superior of the Sisterhood itself is suddenly working again with her own house. Like, is there no conflict of interest there? Are there no rules or laws that you can't cross this ethical barrier and use your power to help your own house? The fact that later in the episode we'll see Harrow has been given a seat with the help of this pair of counselors. No one is objecting to that. No one is objecting to suddenly House Harkonnen being elevated, clear, like very blatantly because of the Mother Superior's involvement. We even get the sense that both Harrow and what's his name, Evgeny, the uncle, are like aware that the Sisterhood manipulates people.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, if House Harkonnen, who are a bunch of nobodies, are aware that the Sisterhood manipulates people quite blatantly, why is everyone else, in particular these two other council members, just like trusting everything their sisters say implicitly and just going along with it? It certainly works in their favor, so I will grant it that. Like it feeds into a desire that they have as well to move against House Carino. So it's a favorable political move, but I don't know. It all feels a little clunky, you know. It feels like a very like amateurish politicking. I'm not seeing like the sophistication that I would expect, or the long-term planning, or the subtlety that I would expect of the Sisterhood. This montage didn't work for me because it just raised all of these clunky questions about why everyone is just kind of going along with this and not smart enough to question things more.
Yeah, because I saw this comment, and I definitely had a moment when the two High Council members come out of the elevator and they go, "Oh, Reverend Mother Superior, didn't expect to see you here." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm working for House Harkonnen now." Like that moment, also similarly, I was like, "What, is this fine?"
Right, but isn't that a huge red flag?
Isn't that a huge red flag? But my follow-up kind of considerations were, first, exactly what you said. What the Bene Gesserit, the Truthsayers, have done is they have actually just outlined what things have happened. House Rachese has left the High Council and is not pressing charges about the mysterious death of their child. Isn't that fucking strange? And probably they've sussed out correctly the Emperor was complicit in the murder of this child and the heir of a great house and a powerful family. And they're saying, you know that Carino's like in on this. And the two guys are like, wow, that's fucked up. We need to do something about it. Yeah, someone should open an inquiry, but we don't want to get in trouble. So what they have done is they've given them truth. And with that truth, they have made the decision that someone needs to call them out and we need a scapegoat. And so everything they've done, even if people are manipulating, that doesn't change the fact that this is the only way I can protect my house moving forward, is making sure someone attempts to hold the House Carino accountable for this shit that's happened. The other possibility, which I think is less likely the more I think about it, is that the whisper rumor and the bad impression of the Bene Gesserit is specifically a House Harkonnen thing because Valia left and quote unquote abandoned House Harkonnen for the Bene Gesserit. So this is because Valia is there, they're like, oh, these fucking manipulators, these she betrayed us and she left us. Maybe that's a specifically House Harkonnen thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
those are all good points.
Nevertheless, I think there is a moment of like, oh, they're really being bold about this in a way that might be a little clumsy. Anyway, now back to our summary. On Wallach 9, Tula decides to do sort of a guided meditation / like art therapy session / collective drug trip where everyone's going to draw their dreams. And in an excellent and really scary scene.
This is great.
The acolytes are all stuck in their trance. They are, she tries to call them back and fully fails. The sisters are drawing, they go from their individual drawings to visions of sand, of the gaping maw of Shai Hulud, of worms, sandworms, and the pair of eyes staring out at them from the dark black of the charcoal on paper.
Right.
It also occurred to me earlier, Jen lies about not having a dream, right? Not having a nightmare. She woke up alarmed and just like all the other sisters. And when she is asked by Tula, says, you'd have to ask the other sisters because I didn't have a nightmare. She naturally, that's a little sketchy. And maybe as a result of that, Tula omits her from the group sketch therapy, which feels like kind of an intentional, her nightmare, her specific vision is going to be important later.
Yeah, we're setting up Jen for something for sure. The fact that she was omitted is not without reason.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what she would have drawn. And of course, the person, and I also appreciate Sister Emmeline has been the one to throw out quotes from religious texts for the entire series. She did the same thing with Lila's agony. She says immediately, they're all looking at these terrifying eyes out of the darkness, quote, "God is watching us, judging us. The reckoning is here," end quote.
Ooh.
And I'm like, all right. You just came out of a drug trance. Like, give it a fucking second before you start analyzing. But some huge Leto 2 vibes here, right? We've talked about how these two eyes peering out of the darkness feels very like Leto 2. Well, that is God is watching us, God is judging us, that sort of omniscient, prescient being who is constantly aware of everything you're doing is very Leto 2 energy, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Now, returning to the palace, we get a scene where Empress Natalia comes to Desmond's office and reveals to him and to us that she has been the one spreading these rumors about the Pruitt boys' murder. And she also gives Desmond Imperial surveillance data about machine dealers trading in illegal technology, as she says.
Yeah.
Much like our Ixian friend from earlier who we
Right.
saw in the alleyway. And Desmond takes the data and, she's like, now is not the time to be lenient. Now is when we go hard in the paint. Now is when we crush the machine sympathizers.
Let's be bold.
And actually clamp down on this illegal machine trade.
Right.
That's running rampant. And so Desmond does exactly that. In a quick scene right after, we see him do his Bashar duties, order the security forces to go out into the city and use this surveillance data to capture these machine sympathizers, to bring them to justice.
Indeed. Now, Yanez, of course, all of those sympathizers are at Ducklurb, and we too return to Ducklurb, in which we're all fam. Yanez finds Kieran and admits that she's conflicted and confused about what to do about her father and Desmond. And he tells her to do the right thing, and he's trying to do the right thing, even if that means disobeying her father and moving against her own family. Quote, "Sometimes you have to burn a thing down before you can save it," end quote.
Okay, Kieran.
He nearly says, "Sometimes you have to put a thermal, self-guided autonomous drone into the vents and blow up a whole family before you can save it." And she's like, "Say that again?" And he's like, the classic idiom, the thing we always say. So Yanez takes this to heart and seeks out her hot half-brother Constantine and basically tries to unify as siblings her move against effectively her father and his right-hand man, Desmond.
Yeah.
And he reluctantly agrees. Meanwhile, Sister Theodosia confronts Valia about why she was brought to Seleucia. And she goes, I didn't bring you here to ask me all these questions. It's like, all right, fair. I asked you 2 questions. Huge defensive overreaction, but fine. Why did you bring me here? Now, Valia goes, you know why I brought you here. And Theodosia has a very emotional reaction to that.
Yeah.
It was your promise to me that I would never have to do insert blank here ever again. It's our secret. You agreed. It was a condition for me becoming a sister. And Valia goes, well, your talent, it's not a talent. Not a talent. It's an abomination, curse. I'm a werewolf or something. But Valia and I appreciated, I think the acting here was also excellent, where she said, listen, okay, not a talent. It's a last resort. I won't ask you unless I absolutely need to, because we're up against something that can destroy us. I don't know how to beat Desmond. I do not know how to defeat him. And I may need your whatever we want to call it. Nevertheless, Theodosia is clearly pissed about this. She goes, you've already asked me, basically.
Right.
And leaves it there. Like, how
Which is
dare
fair.
you
Just by
Yeah.
bringing me here, you've practically already asked me to do a thing that I swore I never would again, you know?
Right.
It's a icky type of manipulation. Well, from there, we finally get to this Landstrad meeting that we've been prepping for this whole episode. Everyone gathers, and this obviously is sort of the convergence point where all of these schemes we've watched throughout the episode will finally come to a head.
Yeah.
Harrow does his thing. He stands up. He throws out his request for an inquiry into Pruitt's death to everyone's surprise. Before he can name exactly who he's accusing of Pruitt's death, Yanez steps forward and boldly accuses her own family for being complicit in this murder. But Desmond quickly shuts all of the chaos down and takes control of the room by parading in a number of these tech smugglers that he has captured, including Hulk Hogan, including our Exene friend from earlier.
Right.
And Desmond kind of pulls the same move he's been pulling ever since we met him. He admits to the murder now to the entire Landstrad body. He says, yes, I killed the Pruitt boy, but it was not murder. It was a justified execution against a machine sympathizer.
Yeah.
And with a dramatic flourish, he brings out the drone, the bomb drone thing, and he's like, the very same machines that would have blown all of your asses up if I hadn't prevented it.
Ugh.
What a drama king. I mean, you love to see it.
He had glitter in his pockets too. He was like, and that's why I'm here. Flourish. Yeah.
Right. Travis Fimmel really chewing up the scenery in this moment here.
I goddamn love it. The wandering spiders.
Yeah. He's doing a whole bit and it's really working. And I will say, like, he's really giving Manfred Toronto here for folks who have read Sisterhood of Dune and know that character who isn't present in the show by name. If you have read Sisterhood of Dune early on in that book, there's a whole chapter where Manfred goes to a Landstrad council and demands that everyone commit to drawing a hard line against thinking machines.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he's a character who hates thinking machines. He's the leader of the Butlerians. That is exactly what Desmond does here as well. He declares that a hard line will be drawn against thinking machines. And then he proves his point by saying, we're going to start right now. He burns the captured tech smugglers and one of the counselors too, I think.
Yeah. And to be clear, with Havako's blessing, with his like, at your command, my liege. And he kind of clumsily bows. And Havako, after a moment's consideration, is like, yeah, burn some fellas.
And burn he does. He burns the rebels and that counselor. But then we see Desmond fall to his knees. Clearly, this ability takes something out of him. And we even see blood seeping through his jacket. There's also a moment where we get a quick flash. It felt more like vision and less like a real flashback to an actual event. But we see the worm sort of consuming him. We see the blue eyes once more converging into one single eye. And then the very close-up shot of Desmond's one magical eye that he apparently uses for his powers, or that Shai-Hulud gave him. So we get some imagery there and some more hints and teasing as to what may have actually happened to Desmond on Arrakis.
I do love the POV of Shai-Hulud, like coming in. You see the thumpers on either side, the dead bodies scattered. Really fun. Yeah. I also wanted to point out, for the first time, the two eyes now are reflecting a little bit on a surface in that shot. So it's sort of like we're getting just tiny, tiny incremental details more.
And the mechanical whirring, to me at least, is starting to sound a bit more like words too. Still sort of indecipherable, but it's...
Yeah.
Because I was like, I got to turn the subtitles on. The blue eyes actually said something this time, and it's still nothing in the subtitles, so they're not revealing anything. But to me, it sounded like there might have been some like garbled words within there as well. So I think you're right. We're getting like tiny, tiny increments of what that could be.
Now, back on Wallach 9, we see the aforementioned scene where Sister Emmeline gathers a group of sisters to read from the OC Bible under a cone of silence. And she says, although Dorothea killed herself in sorrow, her beliefs live on. And this is where I'm wondering, does she believe that, or is she just kind of sticking to what she's been told?
Yeah, this felt out of left field for sure.
For sure. And interesting. So Dorothea's kind of rebel group survives through Emmeline and these other sisters. And Tula then has a vision of Emmeline confronting her about Dorothea's death. I loved the Emmeline coming around the corner and then the sand begins to fall. We start to get that like Inception style visual cue that this is a dream vision.
Yeah.
And after literally killing one of her students to protect the secrets in this dream vision, she wakes to find that Lila is gone from the spice tank. Lila, clearly a drama school student, learned dramatic reveals, didn't just immediately get up and wake Tula. She wandered into the darkness.
Good point.
Goes off into the darkness somewhere. Tula has to then, with her knife drawn, be like, what the fuck is happening?
Right.
You know, she wakes up Anarul, the AI tree robot, and all the like digital trees illuminate the room to reveal a confused gray, blue-eyed Lila. Was not sure if this is like Eyes of a Bad or something else.
Yeah, unclear.
Kind of an interesting visual effect. And asks, "Where am I?" Which, good fucking question. You're the one who walked into the darkness. Why didn't you just wake up Tula?
Girl,
Tula's
just wake me up next time. Just nudge me awake.
Tula's in that chair, just and you're like wandering into the darkness. Very strange, but it's fine. Works for a dramatic reveal. And of course, there's this great shot of all of the computer systems. Might literally be visualizations of family trees and bloodlines and all sorts of cool data.
Fun, like holographic tree imagery for a breeding index that monitors family trees.
Yeah, it's kind of fun.
Now, to round out this episode, in our final climactic scene, we get a quick shot of Valia telling Theodosia that she has acquired a sample of Desmond's blood. She found this like bloody rag with his blood on it. And that they, they got to ship it off to 23andMe, do a quick DNA test and find out who this guy actually is.
Wow, 1% Mongolian. That's cool.
Oh my God, we're related if we go back far enough. Wow.
That's so cool. That's so neat. They're like, so what are you going to do about his fucking psychic powers? He's like, I got no clue. But he's 12% Northern European. So like, that's
how fun
great.
Is that?
How fun is that? That's so cool. 3% Neanderthal? Whoa, that's more than 80% of people.
But it does feel like this is setting up that we're finally, I think episode 5, we are going to get Desmond backstory. We're going to finally learn about Desmond Hart in the next episode, and this feels like
Agreed.
that it is setting that up, laying the first brick of that reveal. We then get this very emotional, I'm going to talk more about this in my takeaway, but just to briefly summarize it here, we get this emotional standoff between Valia and her uncle. She lets her uncle die, and then looks over and sees her brother Griffin walk in.
Yeah.
And for a second, it's kind of played like a vision. You know, you're watching it and you're like, okay, another vision. Tula just
Other
had a
memory
vision. It's whatever.
Or something. Yeah.
And but then she goes over and then physically hugs Griffin. They embrace each other. They talk to each other, and you're like, oh shit, what is happening?
Yeah.
What is happening is Griffin is actually Sister Theodosia.
The last possibility I fucking considered it.
Wild. After exchanging some words and a hug, Sister Theodosia walks away. We see her transform, shapeshift, face dance, question mark,
maybe,
back into herself. And that's where we cut to credits. We end on that dramatic reveal.
Yeah. That conversation was interesting to watch twice, because the first time, all of the lines make sense about like Griffin and what he did and going after Vorian, and did she push him too far? Did she ask too much? He says, I own my own decisions, which has so much emotional resonance after this hugely emotional fight with her uncle. And then you go back and you rewatch the scene knowing it's Theodosia, and she's going, I understand what you had to sacrifice to get to this point, and I will do what you don't worry, I'm making this decision for myself and blah, blah, blah. So it was kind of an interesting conversation that had two layers.
Yeah, very clearly had two layers, one for Griffin and one for Theodosia, for sure. Every line worked for both.
Yeah, which was kind of fun. But yeah, definitely a fucking wild way to end the episode, and asks some absolutely some highliner-sized questions that are now floating in orbit around this watching experience.
For sure.
Now, we are going to take a quick break now that our summary is done. And we've got some what worked, what didn't work, and our takeaways, and of course, also Minutia coming up. So don't go anywhere, dear listener. We'll be right back right after this.
Welcome back, folks. Let's continue our discussion about Dune Prophecy Episode 4, starting by sharing our impressions of this episode, what we thought worked and what we thought didn't work.
Yeah.
I'll let you kick it off for us, Leo. What in this episode clicked for you?
You know, I'm still having fun. I was having a great time watching this. I liked the group meditation scene. It was so scary. So, just excellent, really haunting. The fact that she's losing control and that she's backing up. I think the show does scary stuff really well. I had a similar feeling when Tula wakes up to find the spice chamber empty. I was like, what the fuck's happening in that whole sequence? So I was shaking in my little boots a few times in this episode, really enjoying that element. The idea of peeling back layers of fear and prophecy feels very apropos for Dune. And I've heard discussions of how a lot of our fears in life are just the fear of death, wearing different masks, and how this kind of theory of what fear is, from a survival standpoint, all feels very human and feels very resonant for me.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciated the conversations around shaping the future you want and correcting histories. Obviously, that's very resonant with Leto's words in God Emperor of Dune. But in this episode, Valia is talking about, fixing the history of the cowardly, the cowards of Corran, right? House Harkonnen, the cowards of Corran, fixing that and creating this future that they want. Desmond, similarly, goes, Emperor Haviko, what do you want the history to say about you? You get to create that future yourself right now. And then also, Natalia is say what you will about the Bene Gesserit, but they create the futures they want, and I respect that about them, and that's what we should be doing right now as well. So I enjoyed that we had these different characters all kind of speaking to a central theme of what do the histories get wrong, what do they get right, shape the future you want, and when people look back on now, what will they say? All very cool and felt very appropriate to Dune. Couple of little moments I really liked. I mentioned it already, Valia, her being sassy with her uncle was so funny to me. Gives very family drama at Thanksgiving energy. Yeah. I laughed out loud. I was like, oh my God, she's fucking starting shit over the breakfast table. This is great. Haro Harkonnen's reaction to the moment the room laughs at House Harkonnen's familiarity with Conley, I thought was excellent, right? We get that setup that he hates when people laugh at him or don't respect him. And then he is in this moment where he's got the floor at the Lance Red, all the most powerful people in the universe. And he decides, fuck it. Yeah, I'm going forward with this because y'all just laughed at me. I'm throwing down a challenge of Conley, right? I thought that was great. Travis Flamel, the Wandering Spiders, is going to be with me until the day I die. I love how much fun he's having in this episode. He is so dramatic. I fucking love it. It's so much fun. I also now want to go back and rewatch Vikings because I really enjoyed him in that as well. And the last thing I'll say, no gratuitous sex scene this time. Hey, look at that. HBO. Good job, buddy. I know how hard it is to leave out the banging, but they left it out this time, which was great. And some of the musical cues I even loved during the conversation where the High Council members are talking with Haro Harkonnen. I loved it. It was kind of comedic, kind of light, kind of bouncy, and it left space for you've demonstrated a lot of prowess during your trade of whale fur. That line read with the music, I was having a blast. So those are some of the things I really liked. What about you? What do you think worked well in this episode?
I have a pretty short list, unfortunately. I'm quite
Uh-huh.
sad to say. Most of this episode didn't work for me. I greatly disliked this episode for various reasons, some of which we'll share shortly. But to just kind of highlight what I did like, I was definitely pretty locked in and pretty intrigued whenever we cut back to Wallach 9. I'm very interested in what's going on with the sisters, these dreams the acolytes are having, what's with the worm imagery and the two eyes. Who is this God who is watching? What is this
Yeah.
reckoning that's coming? In particular, I'm dying to know what's going on with Lila, right? She's out of the tank. She's up and walking around. What does it mean? That's all very intriguing and definitely has its hooks in me. So the Wallach 9 stuff really works for me.
Hmm.
I also want to continue to shout out the visuals and the costuming and the set design of this show.
Yeah.
It's been spectacular from jump, and it continues to be great here in this episode. And I think they've made some very strong and some very smart visual storytelling choices that tie it very nicely to Villeneuve's aesthetic, but also add a little bit of their own flavor on top. So I have been enjoying that a lot as well.
Yeah, agreed. Totally. What about things that you didn't like?
This is where the list is longer, but I'll try to keep it quite broad and summarize my thoughts here. But basically, everything about the palace scheme and Desmond, anytime we basically cut away from Wallach 9 didn't work for me in this episode. It veered from sort of like boring to bad to meandering to like it never hooked me in any way. And
Sure.
even on a rewatch, I found my eyes like I felt my eyes just like glazing over, or the temptation to just pick up my phone and scroll during those scenes. It wasn't working. In particular, I really got to call out the truly awful writing in the Kira Atreides scenes.
Yep.
We said this in our FaceTime chat
Yeah.
that we posted, but it is quite jarring and shocking how much the quality of the writing drops, in particular when we cut back to those scenes.
Yeah.
I know it's become kind of a joke in our Discord. The Club has become kind of a joke in our Discord about how much I hated it, but it's like the reason is the writing, and I continue to dislike it because of that reason. It's all very bad, and I've rejected the like CW comparisons that people have made online about this show, but I have to concede it here with the Kieran Atreides plotline and the writing whenever we cut back to it. It feels very CW, it feels very amateur. It just isn't working. I think zooming out, my sort of broad criticism is twofold. One, 4 episodes in, it's very clear that the show is juggling way too much, and the season is beginning to cave under the weight of all of these plot lines that we're setting up, all of these character arcs that we don't have time to actually do any justice to. So we're rushing through stuff or assuming stuff is happening off screen. It's too much crammed into what is only a 6-episode season 1. My second broad, like major criticism at this point of the show is that, particularly here in episode 4, I'm frustrated how much the show isn't trusting its audience to keep up and follow along and be smart. A lot of this episode, and in particular, a lot of the palace stuff, is just retreading old ground that we've spent 3 episodes setting up already. We're just going over it again, like Kieran Atreides is scheming with rebels. Okay. The Emperor is insecure. We already set that up like way back in episode 1. Here he says it more explicitly, I guess, but not sure we needed that. Desmond is dangerous and mysterious, but we still know nothing about him. Retreading that whole ground again. Natalia is being sneaky and underhanded and working behind the Emperor's back. That also happened all the way back in episode 1. So I'm just like frustrated that this show, it almost felt like somebody gave notes on episode 4 that was like, well, didn't we just do a whole flashback episode? People are going to be confused. We should like remind them what is happening in the present timeline and where the chess pieces are. And it's like, it's only 6 episodes, man. Nobody's going to be confused. Just keep going with your story. And it just shows to me, and it just reveals to me that there was a lack of trust in the audience being able to keep up, which is frustrating. I think a big reason the palace stuff didn't work for me is because, and this feeds into not trusting the audience, we're told everything that everyone is doing. We are flies on the wall with every single chess piece as they're scheming against each other leading up to the Landsrat meeting. Nothing about what anyone is doing or their motivations is obscured or mysterious or left up to interpretation.
Yeah.
And that to me is just, that's not interesting. Like if you're going to spend a whole episode doing palace intrigue, then, clearly Game of Thrones is the gold standard for that. And there's a reason why like big reveals in Game of Thrones work. And it's because we, the audience, are given just enough to stay tantalized and want to keep watching, but not so much that it's like, oh, okay, now I just know what everyone's doing. You got to remember to have the intrigue if you're going to do palace intrigue. And I think this episode leaned a bit too much into hand-holding the audience rather than letting us be a participant in the mysteries at play on Seleucia Secundus. So those are sort of my broad critiques. Of course, I could nitpick other things, but zooming out, those are sort of my distilled feelings walking away from episode 4. I'm curious where you're at, though. What were some of the critiques you had for this episode?
Yeah, well, a lot of what you're saying resonates with me. And as much as like I've definitely been more positive about the show broadly, and I still very much enjoyed this episode, the Kieran scenes are so hard to watch. And especially on rewatch, they get so much worse each time I see them. Like, and part of it's just like the number of cuts in the scenes. It doesn't feel like any of the actors are really acting that much. The writing is really tough. The like righteous but not pure, that's what I always say thing was
Hulk
like
Hogan. I'm glad he's dead.
Hulk Hogan. Yeah, thank God. He like, and again, no shame to the actor himself, because again, so much of that's just producing on a tight deadline and not having the time for retakes, and you're shooting a ton of coverage and hoping in the editing room it comes together. I don't know. There's so many ways we could explain how it got here, but the way that it is, where we are, it just feels so cliche. The whole conversation with the Ixian in that nondescript back alley where they're like, I'm my favorite Ixian, and then the guy who just looks like the most comical comic book villain mobster with the heavy grill and the like, it's a big bump, goes boom. Like that whole scene was just, I mean, it feels like it could be in the Green Arrow on CW, right? And like in derogatory. I mean, to be clear, derogatory. Like that show had fine qualities, but it's rough. And it really is shocking in comparison to some of the good writing that we're seeing on the show as well. Like it's so strange to get the great scenes and then to get these scenes and it's like, what?
Yeah. Right. It's the inconsistency in the writing that is jarring to watch from scene to scene. And to your Ixian point, if I can interject, like one of my nitpicks I did have was like there was a lot of Dune terminology, sort of like fan service dropping in this episode. Someone casually said Mentat at one point. Later in Minutia, we're going to talk about Conley, which I think was actually used quite well. But this was an opportunity to show us an Ixian on screen and to make it memorable.
Yeah.
And we didn't do any of that.
They fucking did that. They made it,
so that to me,
memorably bad.
That like fan service is a whole separate discussion that we could have at some point. But I think Conley was used correctly. And when it comes to like fan service and nods toward an established universe and world building, I think like this Ixian example was a huge letdown. I think the throwaway Mentat line made me roll my eyes. It felt like there were a few examples of that throughout this episode. I
will say, I think the challenge is if they don't have any of it, or if that's just happening in the background, right? We then start feeling like it's not Dune. So I think there's a balancing act. And I think you're right in saying like, my favorite Ixian. I have no problem with him being Ixian. And in fact, the Ixian being introduced to the universe as a pushing the limits of technology but I would much rather, that's in line. I would love for that character to have been a sort of tech savvy,
memorable in some way,
technocrat, who or someone who is like a brilliant hacker character. Like the fact that he's like a ruffian thug with like everything
it's
about
just so
him
uninspired. Yeah.
it feels like, and I think this is somewhat your point, it feels like you had this scene of rebels meet with arms dealer in alleyway, and you wrote the whole scene, and then you went, oh shit, it's not Dune, and then you went back in and changed some words so that it sounds like Dune.
Turned him into an Ixian. Yeah, great.
And which is also a lot of Brian and Kevin's books. It's just like a space sci-fi thing where they're just constantly using Dune terminology kind of wrongly. So I
sorry to get us off into a
tangent.
No.
And I think it's a valuable tangent because I think ultimately, like, I wasn't bothered at all by the Mentat line, and I'm fine with him being an Ixian because those things make sense. What doesn't work is when you have this like fully realized scene that feels like a Green Arrow scene, and then you slap some like Dune terminology on it.
Right.
Is frustrating because you have so many things that you clearly know about, and talking to Allison and talking to Jordan, they fucking know this stuff. And they can make this a much more informed character and that feels like this is the Dune universe. But it's just that they didn't do that.
You're slapping the Mercedes sticker on the Honda and you want me to believe I'm stepping into a Mercedes, you know?
Yeah. You can feel it and how it bumps on every bump on the road. This is a Mercedes. Yeah. I also, reading your like retreading ground point, I agree. I feel like a ton happened in this episode, right? Like Lila's up and walking, right? And also, Yanez has taken a public stand against her father, and also a High Council member was burned in front of everyone. Everyone knows that Desmond has this power, and also, blah blah. You know, a lot of stuff has happened, but I still don't feel like I have answers to any of the questions. I've not been worried about the timeline almost at all, but now I am starting to feel like, man, you are really drawing this out. The carrot's been there in front of me for 3 episodes now, and I'm still no closer to getting any carrot. And I want some carrot. I'm hungry. Looking at Constantine has given me an appetite for carrot, I guess. Point is, if you know what I mean. Point is, it is starting to feel slow in that regard, which is funny because, again, it feels slow, but then I look back and I'm like, oh, actually quite a bit happened this episode.
Yeah, right. That's the funny part. Like, so much technically happened. Like, a lot of dominoes fell over, but it was a pile of dominoes over there that fell over, not the dominoes that for 3 episodes you've been telling me to pay attention to and be emotionally invested in, you know?
Yeah. Oh, true.
And it's wrong set of dominoes, and I'm not sure where the trail is that will make those dominoes finally connect to the ones I'm supposed to be paying attention to over here.
Yeah.
That's kind of what this episode felt like to me.
That's such a good analogy. So anyway, I will end the things that didn't work for me by saying my hope, and I think what they can do to save all of this, is that episode 5 answers a lot of questions, resolves some of these mysteries, and then gives Valia the answers to these questions so that Valia can, in episode 6, wrap everything up in a nice, satisfying finale way. And if that happens, sick. And this is just kind of a low point. Otherwise, as much fun as I was having, there were definitely some rough moments. And hopefully with Hulk Hogan dead, the Duck Clurb is less of a highlight. The Ixian is dead. Really wish, again, that Ixian had a better first debut in the Dune universe. Good Lord.
100%. This machine is going to go boom. It's going to go boom real big. You hear?
I wrote that in Python. Goes boom dot execute. You know, it's like, it's so strange. Whatever. We don't need to belabor the Ixian point.
Right. We've made our point there.
It's just could have been done differently.
Okay, well, let's move on to our takeaways. We have a couple of thematic things we wanted to unpack a little bit further. We each picked one thing we wanted to dig a bit deeper into. Do you want to kick it off for us? Yeah,
sure. And this is going to be pretty quick, but mostly this is inspired by something you said during our little FaceTime call. So my takeaway today is Dune's most popular quote, "Fear is the mind killer." And from the earliest episodes of Dune Prophecy, we have seen Havoko Carino's caution around inciting panic or hysteria. We've seen him feeling the fear of, I'm surrounded by scorpions. And in the second episode, Havoko even orders Valia to keep Desmond's crime secret, else it could, quote, turn the Imperium into a circus of fear and rumor, end quote. Now, you might have noticed I emphasized one of the words there.
Rumor.
I emphasized the word. Yeah, rumor. Subtle. Fear, right? There's been this ongoing emphasis of fear. And some of Tula's lines from this episode especially put us onto these rails of thinking about how maybe this series is showing us the inception of Fear is the Mind Killer. Now, speaking of Havoko, his entire character is almost entirely driven by fear. The more I've kind of looked through his actions throughout the show, the more I'm seeing him as this like deeply reactive character doing his best to dodge these things he's afraid of. He has a fear of losing control of Arrakis, so he goes into this unwilling marriage arrangement. He's a fear of being dethroned by the Landsrat, the whole reason the Arrakis stuff matters. He has a fear that we learn in this episode of not living up to his father's image. And at the most beautiful breakfast table I've ever seen, he even requires, Yanez, your mother's right, you can't go with the Bene Gesserit. We have to, quote, show a unified front, end quote. But only because of the optics for the Landsrat. He's not like, I need you close. You said you're afraid. I can keep you safe. We're going to be safe together as a family. That's how we remain safe. It wasn't that. It was, we need to be perceived strongly by all of these visiting people who could definitely throw me off the throne, right? Yeah. It's all optics. It's fear. It's fear of the people. Nevertheless, the one inciting all of the fear is right there at his breakfast table. So Desmond Hart, this man who has a flair for the dramatic, has been using his power to disturb the status quo and to incite fear. It's terrorism. It's literally terrorism. In the autopsy room with Sister Nazir, Tula even says about Kasha's death, quote, she had a nightmare. Whatever it was terrified her. She knew something was coming, end quote, right? And that's fine. Kasha, isolated incident until, oops, every acolyte had a nightmare tonight. That's a problem. We have this stuff happening on the horizon.
Yeah.
Now, to Tula, when Tula begins unraveling the mystery of Desmond's powers, but also these nightmares and how maybe they're connected, Sister Avila warns her, quote, best leave it alone, lest you start up hysterics, end quote. Tula doesn't leave it alone. She proceeds with her art therapy sip and sketch session gone wrong, and afterwards says the following, quote, I didn't awaken them. The fear did, end quote. And then, quote, whatever this is, it calls forth a terror so crippling that the mind screams to save itself, end quote. So Avila, again, constantly giving bad ideas in this episode. It's like, we should tell everyone, spread the word of how terrifying all this shit is. And
which is the opposite advice of what she just said like a day ago.
And in fact, Tula even throws her the like, well, we can't do that. It would spread hysteria, like you fucking said to me. Quote, if what killed Kasha is rooted in fear, then fear is the last thing that we should be spreading, end quote. Which really felt like the point where you would say fear is the mind killer.
I mean, in particular, the terror so crippling that the mind screams to save itself, you know?
Yeah.
That very much brings to mind fear is the mind killer.
Yeah. And then that is when you would use the litany. But clearly they do not have the litany against fear yet within their Rolodex.
Yeah.
Else someone would have said it 10 times. You know, she would have been whispering it to herself after she found Lila's box empty, her knife held aloft. So, to wrap up, it's totally possible that among many other things this series may be showing us, we are going to be seeing the invention of the litany against fear. And I was thinking, because this is tied to Desmond's powers, maybe one of the reveals here is going to be this is a response to something that Desmond does. He needs you to be afraid before he can do his little power move, right? That'd be a very neat thing to see.
Yeah, this would be a fun origin point of the Litany of Fear. and would give it more weight, if it's something that sisters are taught in order to control their highly honed and trained minds from succumbing to visions and dreams and whatever is happening to these sisters. Like, that's more powerful, right? It becomes
Yeah.
less a quote you use when you're like too scared to get on the roller coaster, and more a quote that like maybe is helping sisters maintain their sanity given their mental and physical abilities. It would add weight.
That's a great point. Yeah. And also it is relevant for even people who have only seen Villeneuve's movies. So
Exactly.
again, I think would strengthen people's interest in the Dune universe. And as much as I shit on it as definitely not the best quote in Dune, it is still a pretty dang good quote. And
Right.
I get why people get it as a tattoo. I just think that's dumb. So that's my takeaway. Abu, what about you? What did you want to talk about today?
So I want to just quickly touch on that final scene in today's episode, which I greatly enjoyed. It was a highlight for sure. That scene between Valia and her uncle. In particular, I want to hone in on some themes around power and strength in this moment that come up, and kind of wrap it up in a bow by talking about Valia's very obvious misconception that those two things are the same thing, that power is strength and that strength is power.
Right. Yeah.
So to get into it a little bit, it's clear from this episode, and in particular this confrontation with her uncle, that even 30 years later, Valia is carrying a lot of family baggage. She has not necessarily come to peace with it. Her uncle, Evgeny, cuts right to her core, in fact, when he says, quote, "Griffin went to his death because of your damned ambitions. You are a black hole in this family." End quote.
Man, how does he feel about her?
Boom. Right to the gut. And hats off to Emily Watson, who I think has been spectacular in this whole show. Some wonderful physical acting here in reaction to hearing those words from her uncle reveal just how much this actually stings Valia Harkonnen, and how much Valia herself has been holding on to that guilt for these last 3+ decades. Then Valia declares in a bold statement why she is better than the family she left behind, right? In sort of retaliation to her uncle's statement. She says, quote, "All of you Harkonnens are cowards, too afraid to make difficult choices. I will not apologize for what I did, and I will not apologize for my strength." End quote. I had goosebumps during this line delivery. My goodness.
Yeah.
Such great stuff there. So much emotion clearly bottled up underneath that rage, right? So much pain, so much sadness, so much guilt buried under the sort of defining emotion that Valia fuels herself with, rage. And I also really liked the last bit of this line where she says, "I will not apologize for my strength." And that's quite revealing, because we've seen Valia be quite the abrasive, forward, outspoken, hard-headed person throughout this show. In particular, in the last episode, we even saw it with young Valia. Strength is a characteristic she really leans into, and she defines it as being a thorn in everyone's side, as having her way, as imposing her will, as gaining the unquestioning loyalty of her subjects. For Valia Harkonnen, that is the definition of strength, and that is what she is not apologizing for here. That's the character we've seen throughout this show. So I think it kind of goes without saying at this point, after everything we've learned about Valia Harkonnen in these first 4 episodes, that she's not the most subtle person. And in fact, I would wager that the concept of soft power seems a bit lost on her, which is interesting to say that about a member of the Sisterhood. For example, she declares to a now dying Evgeny on the ground in front of her, she says, quote, "If you'd had the courage to follow me like Tula did, it wouldn't be the Sisterhood that now towers in the Imperium. It would be House Harkonnen." End quote. And there's a lot of interesting layers to this declaration she's just made, right? On one level, there's this arrogance, right? If you had just done what I told you, things would all be fine, you fucking idiot. I know what to do.
Yeah.
There's this certain level of arrogance here that she and only she knows the right way forward and the best way forward for House Harkonnen, the Sisterhood, the Imperium, all of humanity. And there's another layer here of her just like pure venomous disdain for this like perceived cowardice and weakness of House Harkonnen. Again, speaking to her definition of strength and what she perceives as weakness. This whale first stuff they've been doing for decades now, to her, that's weak. That's complacency. That's you sitting on your laurels, not doing anything. That's you not forging a path forward. That's not strength. That's weakness. But if you know anything about the concept of soft power, you know that like economic influence is one of the most effective ways of softly asserting your power without coercion, without force, without military might. And she's overlooking that here. And so for Valia, every problem she sees is a nail, and she, Valia Harkonnen, Mother Superior of the Sisterhood, is the one holding the solution hammer that we got to bang this nail with as hard as we can. That is how she perceives the world around her. And, I love that we've gotten this insight into who Valia is as a person in these episodes thus far.
Yeah.
I want to contrast that, though, with her sister, who says something dramatically different in episode 3 to the young Atreides boy. Young Tula says, quote, "True strength isn't always something you see from the outside." End quote.
Yeah, that's really poignant. And we see also, like, Valia's perception of strength makes sense then why she, following Raquel's death, would say, you know what the Sisterhood needs? An empress on the throne.
Yes, the most brutal way forward to power.
Most literal example of power, galactic power that she can understand. Let's arrest that. That's ours.
Yep, great point.
And then Tula is like, I don't know if you're... Are we still on track? Because the element, that idea of true power is something that's hidden. It's in the shadows. It's great. That's a really great point. The idea that young Tula's statement reflects on perhaps her feelings about Valia's ambition for power. It's very cool.
Yeah, and I think it's you're already sort of digging at it naturally here, but it's very interesting to consider these two sisters' viewpoints in the context of the Sisterhood as we eventually know them in Paul's time, as we know what they will become. 10,000 years from now, Valia, and to some extent Raquel, she's sort of inherited this from Raquel, they both have this like arrogance, this certainty that they know what is best, that they should be the stewards of all of humanity, and certainly this Imperium, and certainly the rulers of this Imperium going forward. That's why we made this breeding program, so that we can make better rulers, because the ones we have are fucking idiots. We know what's better than this. There is a certain level of arrogance there, because you have to question, like, do you know what's better than this? And that is in line with the Bene Gesserit as we know them in the books 10,000 years from now. They continue to have this belief that their vision of humanity, their vision of the Kwisatz Haderach, in order to steer humanity, is the right path forward, which I think is worth questioning. But we also see that the Sisterhood in 10,000 years' time becomes much more subtle, much more patient, much more surgical, much more secretive. All of these qualities that I think Valia in this moment lacks. She just has the hammer and she's hammering away at her problems. Whereas by the time of Paul Atreides, I believe the Sisterhood has learned that there is value to soft power. There is value to patience and long-term plans that take thousands of years instead of decades. There is value to pulling strings from the shadows rather than trying to hammer everything into the shape that we want it to be. So that's sort of where I wanted to wrap up my takeaway. This idea of how Valia views strength, how that manifests in her relationship with her family, and in particular her uncle in this scene, but also what that kind of clues us in on about the Sisterhood at large. their past, their present, and where they may be headed in the future.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And I think it is like absolutely key to character motivations and the events as they've played out, and some of the conflict between Tula and Valia, which was, as we've said, is like, I'm glad they're the beating hearts of the show because it is some of the most compelling stuff, is the sacrifices they're both making for what they think is right. And it's also the most tragic because, as Tula witnessed with Ori, there isn't always one solution to the problem, but Valia is kind of convinced that her solution is the right solution, and there's no better alternative when in fact there very well could be.
Yeah.
So
consider how quickly she decided Desmond Hart is what the prophecy was about as soon as she heard it in that last episode.
Yeah.
Well, those are our takeaways. Let's take another quick breather. We have one more segment to go, folks. We're almost there. Finish line in sight. Let's take a breather, but don't go anywhere. When we come back, we're digging into some lore Easter eggs in our Minutia segment. We'll see you in a minute.
welcome back, everybody. Hope you enjoyed your break. Quickly now, put your fingers together. Let's observe some minutia. And the first thing that we observed is House Vernius. So in today's episode about so many great houses and houses in the High Council of the Landsraad, one of the houses announced was House Vernius. Now, House Vernius is a significant house in Dune, this mostly in the prequel books, but House Vernius calls home Planet Ix. House Vernius is in charge of Planet Ix for thousands of years. We are not 100% clear if that's happened at this point yet. House Vernius could just be an important house, and maybe whoever's in charge of Ix now, by the end of the series, will be ousted, and House Vernius will take over. But House Vernius, nevertheless, by the time of Paul Atreides, certainly, and by the time of Leto Atreides, Daddy Leto Atreides, is in charge of Ix, which is very cool. Now, actually, 10,000 years after this show's events, House Vernius does crumble to the ground. They are basically dissolved in events that directly involve Daddy Atreides himself, Leto Oscar Isaac Atreides himself. So very interesting stuff. A lot of the House Atreides, House Harkonnen books involve Dominic Vernius, the fucking hottest dude, big mustache. So very fun to see House Vernius get a shout out in today's episode.
That's right. And actually, our second bit of minutia continues this thread on Ix because we obviously meet an Ixian, as we discussed in our summary in today's episode. Yeah. So a little bit about Ix. They are basically just like the Silicon Valley of the Dune universe, a bunch of techies who are pushing the boundaries of ethics and Butlerian prohibitions. And even by the time of Paul Atreides, 10,000 years from now, they are known for pushing those boundaries. So they clearly don't learn their lesson. They, for example, are responsible for developing technologies like the Cone of Silence, which we have seen throughout this series, as well as the Hunter Seeker, which, if you'll recall from the Denis Villeneuve films, is the little flying needle bug thing that almost kills sweet, sweet Timothée Chalamet in Dune Part 1. There's also a quick Arafel connection to the Ixians. Obviously, Arafel, an important term in the show so far. In the Dune books, the first time the word Arafel is used is in relation to, you guessed it, folks, these goddamn Ixians. Quote, "Do not fear the Ixians. They can make the machines, but they no longer can make Arafel." End quote.
Also, don't fear them because they've got grills and tattoos, and they talk like this: big boom, thermal bomb, boom. Not afraid of him, no. Next up, we have Padishah. So today, we get Javico's full title. Padishah, Emperor of the known universe, Javico Carino the First, which is, of course, long and fun, and includes the Persian word Padishah. So Dune, for anybody who hasn't been listening to us for the last 4 years, Dune has at its core Arabic, Pashto, Persian, Hebrew, other languages from the Middle East. And Villeneuve's films caught a little bit of flack for not including enough of those influences that Frank so clearly appreciated and researched. So all of this is to say, it is very fun to hear some of these Persian, Arabic Pashto terms in the show on screen for everyone to see.
And to be fair, this show has gotten some of the same flack as well for not calling it the Butlerian Jihad and calling it the Machine War instead. But
Yeah,
obviously it makes sense why you don't want to say the word jihad in 2024 on American television.
yeah, annoying, but understandable.
Next up, we have Conley. In this episode, Harrow Harkonnen at the Landsride meeting mentions the word Conley in his accusations, and he suggests that someone has attacked Pruitt Rochese without observing these required agreements of warfare as defined by Conley. So, hey, let's define Conley. From the terminology of the Imperium at the end of the first Dune book, Conley is defined as, quote, formal feud or vendetta under the rules of the Great Convention carried on according to the strictest limitations, end quote.
Yeah, interesting.
And in fact, at the end of the book, Conley plays a direct role in the fight between Paul and Feyd-Rautha because the fight only happens once Feyd officially calls for Conley.
Yeah,
So,
totally.
So clearly there are rules of engagement within the Imperium. We've talked about how warfare is dramatically different in the Dune universe than your traditional giant armies blasting each other with guns and lasers and spaceships. And Conley is a direct result of that, and Harrow Harkonnen is saying that these rules were broken.
Very cool. Now, our final minutia is Shai-Hulud / Shaitan. And this goes to Desmond saying, right, the myriad animals of the desert scatter when, quote, a leviathan that rises from the sand arrives, and that they are, quote, scared of the devil too, end quote. And this really jumped out at me because we've talked a lot in our various book clubs over the years about Shai-Hulud and Shai-Hulud's place in the Fremen mythology as this sort of deity creator. They are literally called makers, the maker's tooth, right?
Yeah.
And Desmond's line here cuts really deep to the lore of the sandworm. So I wanted to talk about it for a second. So the sandworm's title, Shai-Hulud, which has been used a few times in the series, in the terminology of the Imperium is said to indicate, quote, the earth deity of Fremen hearth superstitions, end quote. And on the other side of things, we have Shaitan, right? Satan. And in the Islamic tradition, Shaitan are, I guess, evil spirits or jinn that are, in particular, like non-believers of Islamic code. And the word is often used even to describe the devil at work doing things, Satan at work. So throughout the Dune series, we see the Fremen's relationship to the worms as a complex one. Sometimes the worm is a god. Sometimes the worm is a destructive natural force that doesn't have good or evil, but is destructive, and you pray to it to not destroy. Sometimes they are worth revering, and for instance, sometimes, like in Heretics of Dune, a desert person is referring to all of the worms as literally Shaitan for what they do to the desert people. So very complex relationship that the Fremen have with Shai-Hulud.
A lot of fun lore tidbits in today's episode for sure. The most, perhaps, that we've had so far. And that's our Minutia segment, folks. Hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something today. Before we say goodbye and before we wrap up today's episode, a couple of very quick reminders.
First, if you want to support us and what we do here at Gom Jabbar, best way to do that is become a patron over at patreon.com/Gom Jabbar. Or you can get some Dune-themed swag from our merch store, or we have a one-time donation link. All of those links are in the show notes below. Your support is what makes what we do possible.
And of course, we love to hear from you. We're all watching this show together, experiencing this story together. We want to hear your thoughts. Tell us what you think. We've only shared 2 opinions here. There are countless opinions on Dune and this show in particular. So email us, gomjabarpodcast@gmail.com. Also send us your questions for future live streams so we can include them in the Q&A and answer them and speak to them. And of course, this is kind of becoming a prerequisite. Send us a cute picture of your pet. We love the cute little Chris.
Cute crits, 1,000 predators. Love to see them.
Love to see them. All right, folks, that's it for today's episode. We're going to make this one go boom. Big boom.
Big boom!
Well, friends, there is no real ending. It's just the place where you stop the recording, but this podcast is always one step beyond logic, so help spread the word of Muad'Dib and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And be sure to check out the other shows on the Lore Party Podcast Network on loreparty.com. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at lore_party. You can also watch video versions of select episodes on the Lore Party YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, whoever controls the podcast controls the universe. We'll see you on the Golden Path.